Hello everyone and welcome to this next lecture in our blockchains course. We've covered multiple phases of this course. We've covered architecture, design of how blockchain platforms are built. And now we're going to get to the next phase of talking about use cases. So before we look at some of the use cases itself, this lecture is going to be a little more at an abstract level about how you should go about thinking about a blockchain application, thinking about a use case. What are some of the considerations to take when you're building a blockchain application? So blockchain itself is, for many industries, people think it's going to be completely transformative. I've just named some of the industries here. There are a lot more that people are looking at. And there are like hundreds of use cases that people have. If you look at some of the blogs, people are looking at blockchain for all sorts of applications, be it in financial services, in supply chain, in insurance, retail, in media, healthcare. There are almost every industry is looking at how blockchain would make a difference for them. This is just a very high level overview of some of the applications. Over the next few lectures, we are going to take three major industries where blockchain is slated to make a substantial impact. We're going to look at financial services, supply chain and logistics, and the public sector. Professor Sandeep Chakraborty is going to cover the public sector use cases. I'll be covering some of the financial services and supply chain logistics use cases. Over the course of the next few lectures, I hope to impress upon you the transformative nature of this technology that is blockchain, and how you could think of new business models and new applications that were not possible before blockchain technology was available. But before we go to the use cases themselves, first let's talk about what makes a good blockchain use case. What are the common tenets of a blockchain use case? And it may not always be easy. And sometimes people fall in the trap of using blockchain when you're not supposed to use it, where it might be better done in a centralized fashion. So for a blockchain use case, you need, of course, a business problem that needs to be solved. So don't try to solve a problem that does not exist for anyone. If no one cares about it, don't try to solve it. And of course, don't try to solve it using blockchain. So there has to be a business problem that people are willing to spend money on, spend time on to have it solved. And of course, it has to be solved using blockchain more efficiently than it can be solved with other technologies, assuming there are other technologies that can be used to solve that problem. There has to be a business network. So there has to be a set of participants involved, some information that these participants are exchanging with each other, and some transactions that these participants are performing that exchange information or exchange some that modify this information in some way. Right? So there has to be this business network that is existing, maybe existing right now, or you're creating this business network to solve a business problem. Right? It might not be a network that exists today, but you're creating it so that you can solve a business problem. And of course, there has to be a need for trust. If there is no need for trust and everyone in this network, every participant in this network is, let's say, is willing to trust a single person with all the information, all the transactions, and if the single person can perform all the transactions and can be a single custodian of all the data, you probably don't need a blockchain for that use case. So it has to involve multiple parties who do not trust each other, but need technology such as blockchain to instill trust. So you need consensus, immutability, finality, and provenance of the information that is getting shared. One part of this trust feature is also the notion of auditability. Right? Sometimes it is just a regulator who does not trust the individual entities, who wants to see that the individual entities are following due diligence, they are following the right set of policies that are set by the regulator, and they want the individual organizations to prove that they are actually following policy. Right? So this is actually in the public sector, some of these use cases have this notion of auditability, providing proof for what you're doing. And there again, blockchain becomes a use case. Right? It's helpful. So what makes a good first blockchain use case? So if you're actually trying to do this for the first time, let's say you are a company and you're going to try using blockchain for some of your use cases, then what are some of the metrics that you should use to determine which use case you try first? Because that does have an impact on your perception of the technology itself, about how easy it is to use. For instance, pick a use case that is fairly limited in scope so that you can test the waters with it. right? Blockchain is not a technology that's very mature as yet. It's still maturing as a technology. So I would definitely recommend starting with something very limited in scope, saying I'm going to solve this small problem for my organization or a set of organizations, and I'm going to define the scope for that. So think of it as a minimum viable product that you're going to build with blockchain that can probably be built in a few weeks. Think of also a small business network. If a problem requires bringing 50 participants into a network versus another problem that requires just maybe 5 participants, start with the network that needs just 5 people to come on board. And that gives you an ability to get off the ground quickly. And unlike traditional software product, where one person can just develop the product, put it out there for others to use, blockchain is a bit different. It does require multiple organizations to agree to come together, join a particular network, work as a consortium. So for that reason, start with a smallish network, right? You can then build your network over a period of time. Blockchain is also built in such a way that it allows for scaling more participants and more scenarios in future. As we discuss various use cases in some of the first production networks that we have built, I will try to emphasize the same principle, right? We're starting with solving a small problem, but we have the vision of building it up for an entire industry, solving a huge range of use cases using blockchain. So that's the motto, right? Start small and grow fast. So the next thing is about understanding the business problem. So what does it mean? What are some of the things you should think of when you are trying to address a business problem? What is the problem you're going to address? So define what the scope of that challenge is going to be, and set that as a clear goal, saying this is the problem statement that I want to address. And think of what is the current way in which that problem is being addressed. Maybe partially, maybe not at all. Think of the current process that is being followed that creates this pain point, right? Understand current systems that are involved in this interaction. Maybe there are no systems. Maybe it's about people are currently exchanging paper documents today. People are probably picking up the phone and calling each other. That could be the business problem. And blockchain helps you address and automate some of those things, right? So understand what current systems are involved and where systems don't exist, and identify areas of improvement. So that would be the next step. And assuming the business problem is fairly large, then figure out whether some sub-problems can be attempted right away. What specific aspects of the business problem will this first application try to solve, right? Make your scope of the problem fairly limited. So the next step, once you've identified what the problem is, you've scoped it out clearly, then you need to understand who the participants are. So who are the business network participants or the organizations who are involved? What role do they play in this business network? If there is no network that's there, if you tell me there is just one participant in this ecosystem, then that probably is not a good blockchain use case, right? If it's just one participant, you should probably be using some kind of a centralized system, maybe a database, maybe a web server that you need, maybe a combination of those. Maybe it can be solved with just that. You probably don't need a blockchain for that. Then who are the specific set of people and organizations, and what are their job roles? Understand the key users in the business network and how they interact with each other. Again, this goes back to the as-is process. How is the process working currently? And in that process, clearly identify the users and their roles that they are performing today. That might change, that you might want to change that in the future, but identify the current set of users and roles. Now, there are many more questions that you can ask yourself, and I'm hoping this set of questions will help you think through maybe your first application that you want to try out yourself. Maybe it's a startup that you want to try. So in all of these things, I think these can be leading questions that you should ask yourself before diving in. So I mentioned who are the participants, what are their roles, what are the different types of participants. How are they going to access and interact with the blockchain? So what are the access control rules? Who are going to be operating the peer nodes? Who are the big entities here who need to be part of the network? Are there going to be some web applications or mobile applications that need to be developed that will interact with the blockchain, and those are the ones that end users will use? Are there gateways? Other data sources from which data should be gathered and fed to blockchain? Likewise, should the blockchain data be sent to other systems of record? Think about those things. They also think about who is going to operate the blockchain, who is going to govern or regulate the blockchain. Maybe it requires forming a consortium. Maybe there is one large player, or let's say a large manufacturer, who brings in all their suppliers onto a blockchain platform. So all of those models are possible. We'll talk about that later in this lecture. And for each participant, each role in this network, be very clear about what is the value or the incentive for that participant to join the network. If they are better off with their current systems and they don't really have any value to join the network, it's going to be very hard for you to convince them to join the network. So every participant in this network should have a business incentive to join the network. I think this is a very key aspect. In the Bitcoin world, all you were doing was you were exchanging Bitcoin assets or transactions on the network, and the set of peer nodes were disjoint from the set of participants, right? It could be they were two distinct roles, and the peer nodes they were getting incentivized through mining, and you get a cryptocurrency for it. In permission blockchains, we are leveraging the fact that in this business ecosystem, there is actually a business incentive for all of these participants to join the network. And it's important to identify that incentive, the value that you will be providing for each participant. And that's going to be a key part in growing the network quickly. Now, the next part, once you've identified the participants, you need to know their identities. So, do you know all the users who are going to be there? How are you going to create the identities? So, in the Bitcoin world, again, there were pseudo-anonymous identities that were created. So none of these identities were verified in any way. In most business use cases, let's say I am a particular organization engaging in business, I already have a set of entities I do business with. And I do want to validate the fact that it's only those entities that are actually part of the network. I don't want anonymous entities, people I don't even know, to be joining the network and partaking in transactions. For instance, I don't even want them to know that this network exists, leave alone seeing data and transactions in the network. So in public blockchains, it's possible to have an identity oracle, could provide the information about who are the identities. But in permission blockchains, including Hyperledger Fabric, there is a gateway or a controller or a consortium that determines the identities of entities or verifies these identities offline. So let's say there's a consortium of 10 banks. They might collectively determine whether a 11th bank should be admitted or not, and they will verify the identity of the 11th bank before admitting them in. So it's not going to be an anonymous user who freely joins the network, but they're going to be validating these new participants every time they join the network. So there is going to be some gateway, some permissioning that happens offline. And Fabric actually gives you some of those governance capabilities. The next step, okay, you've identified the network, the participants, the identities. The next step is for you to understand what are the assets and transactions. So what is the data, that is information that is going to get exchanged amongst these participants? What are the set of transactions to be performed? And what transactions are going to operate on which data and by whom? Right? So all of these need to be identified. So identify the assets, identify the transactions. For each transaction, who are the set of parties or roles who are admitted or permissioned to perform that transaction, and what is the transaction actually going to do? It might read 2 assets, write 3 assets, so you need to identify that. So it might just be a ownership transfer, and so you can define what your transactions are. And transactions themselves could be of different types. They could be invoke transactions. These invoke transactions are going to be recorded on the blockchain. These could be add, delete, change, transfer, ownership. It could be any of these. Or it could just be a query. A query may or may not be added as a transaction on the network. And by definition, the query only reads data. It is not going to be writing any data. So it's possible for you to just read one node in the blockchain and accept whatever information it's giving you. So that would be a query, right? And for all of these functions, think about whether you need to control access. So it is possible for you to define access control rules on who can create, delete, update, or even query some of the information that is getting stored on blockchain. So based on the participant and their roles, you can define the access control rules. So what are some of the additional points of understanding that you need to think about? Think about how the current process is by the different network participants, and think about how you would like it to be in future. So you might think of a completely different way of executing this process. Maybe some of the existing participants may not even be there. So that's the disintermediation that you might read a lot in blockchain. Some of the intermediaries, middlemen, can actually be eliminated in the new world, and that can significantly improve efficiency, reduce cost, and so on. And once you've determined the process you want to go to, the eventual process with blockchain, identify the benefit for each of the participants with the new business case, and also determine what legacy systems are involved and how those might change in the future. Maybe some of the data you're storing in is going to get changed. I talked about paper documents. Maybe current legacy systems are actually just storing scanned copies of paper documents. That is very common in the supply chain world, in the logistics world today, where existing systems, although internally within an organization they're all automated, they're actually storing scanned documents. And whenever they are sending that information to another organization, they might actually print it and courier it. That's the reality today. But maybe in the future, with blockchain, we are looking to digitize all of this information, automatically transfer that over the network. And in that case, the legacy systems would have to move from accepting just scanned documents to be able to accept digital documents. So there might be some changes to legacy systems as well, and that could be disruptive in some cases. So you'll have to work out what that disruption might be and how systems might change in the future. So assessing business value is again a key step for you to be able to succeed in setting up your blockchain network and to grow it. What are the existing pain points? What is, for the scope you have defined, who are the set of participants, assets, and transactions? For each of them, each of the participants, what are the benefits? And there has to be a minimum benefit right now with the minimum viable product you're building. And of course, there has to be a much bigger long-term benefit for them to participate based on other use cases that you might solve for the same network. We'll talk about some of these networks and how we can start small with one use case and grow to solving many other use cases. And of course, after all of this, there has to be a cost-benefit analysis. Almost always, the blockchain system is going to be much more costly for you to implement than using a centralized system. So the benefit of using a blockchain system has to outweigh the cost of running that blockchain network. And often it has to outweigh it multifold because these are disruptive in nature. You're asking people to throw away existing ways of doing work, of doing business, and to move to new ways. And there will be a resistance if the benefit does not significantly outweigh the costs. So that's a very important consideration for use cases. And the use cases that we will see, it'll be apparent that some of the benefits are significantly more than the costs, what the costs are. And how are some ways in which you can build a blockchain network? One way is a consortium-based network where there might be an existing consortium of banks, or there might be a new set of banks, new consortium that's formed among a set of banks. These are happening already. Banks are one of the foremost players in the market who are forming these consortiums. But consortiums can also be formed by other providers. There are healthcare consortiums coming up. There are consortiums in the supply chain world. They're all getting built today because they all have a common business problem they want to solve, and there is an incentive for them to participate in this consortium and leverage the benefits of blockchain. So some of the examples I can cite, IBM is involved in some of them. IBM, there's a food trust that we are working in partnership with Walmart and many other supply chain players. We have an ongoing project with Japan Stock Exchange. So this is to bring in some of the securities trading capabilities to use blockchain. And again, V.Trade is a consortium of banks that have come together for trade finance. Right, so those are some of the consortium-based networks. The other kind of network could be a founder-directed network. So there could be a large company, sometimes even a regulator, brings together several other members in the ecosystem and convinces them to come on and join a network. Right, so there'll be an individual founder. This is usually a strong player or a big entity in the ecosystem today, and they influence a lot of other smaller members to join the network. And we have a couple of examples. We'll talk about that when we talk about some of the use cases. Again, primarily in the financial services ecosystem. Third could be a community-based network. So this could be already a set of entities using some existing system. For instance, Swift is a community. in some sense, right? So SWIFT is a message exchange mechanism amongst banks. So it's a secure way of exchanging messages. And there are many banks that are already part of the SWIFT ecosystem. So those set of banks, they're already using SWIFT to communicate to each other. It might be easy for them to come on to blockchain and use blockchain for their information exchange and for sharing processes. Then likewise, there is also supply chain ecosystems, supply chain communities. They are already a community that are using some form of a system today to exchange messages. It might be a centralized system today, but then they have an incentive to move to a decentralized model. So that could be a community-based network. And there are many of these examples, and Hyperledger Fabric gives you some of the governance mechanisms for initiating and building some of these networks. So with that, that gives you the overview of how to go about setting up a network, how to go about thinking about a blockchain use case. And there are some very nice articles that kind of explain the same principles. Right? There's a nice article from ETH Zurich that it has a title of "Do you need a blockchain?" So they have a nice way of explaining when to use a blockchain, when not to use a blockchain. They actually have a nice flowchart where they take you through different questions, and based on whether you answer yes or no, you should or should not use a blockchain. So it's a nice read. Right? So it's a fun read. There's also a Harvard Business Review article about the truth about blockchain. It talks about, again, when to use blockchain, but it also talks about some of the aspects I talked about, how it's going to be disruptive, some of the things you need to think about before jumping to use blockchain. So it's a nice read as well. With that, I think over the next few lectures, we're going to dive into some of the industries, specifically financial services first, then supply chain, and finally the public sector and government use cases. We're just going to use these as highlights for how a complete industry can be transformed using blockchain, and there's a host of applications in each of these industries. So see you soon on some of those lectures. Thank you.